Hello everyone. Welcome to our new video on top 101 interview questions and answers on Azure Sentinel. As you can see on the slide, Azure Sentinel makes it easy to collect security data across your entire hybrid organization from devices, users, apps, servers, and any cloud. It uses the power of artificial intelligence to ensure you are identifying real threats quickly, and unleashes you from the burden of traditional SIEMs by eliminating the need to spend time on setting up, maintaining and scaling infrastructure. Since it is built on Azure, it offers limitless cloud scale and speed, scaling automatically to address your needs. Let's get started with the interview questions and answers. First, what is risk scoring criteria of Sentinel UEBA? Each activity is scored with investigation priority score, which determines the probability of a specific user performing a specific activity, based on behavioral learning of the user and their peers. Activities identified as the most abnormal receive the highest scores on a scale of 0 to 10. Next, why Sentinel is called Cloud Native SIEM. Sentinel is Cloud Native SIEM, as in, it is born in the cloud, resides in the cloud, and runs in the cloud. It exploits the advantages of the cloud computing delivery model. There are no servers to provision, so scaling is effortless and limitless. Next, how many days of data retention is free in Sentinel? After you enable Azure Sentinel on a log analytics workspace, you can retain all data ingested into the workspace at no charge for the first 90 days. Next, what are some of the data connectors source types that are supported in Sentinel? Some of the data connectors source types are syslog, common event format, trusted automated exchange of indicator information for threat intelligence, Azure and AWS services. Next, how many custom Azure rules per directory can you build? There's a limit of 5,000 custom roles per directory. Custom roles can be created by using the Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, or the REST API. Next, what are various external appliance connection options? To connect an external appliance to Azure Sentinel, the agent must deploy on a dedicated Azure virtual machine, or an on-premises system to support the communication between the appliance and Azure Sentinel. You can deploy the agent automatically or manually. Automatic deployment is only available if your dedicated machine is a new VM that you create in Azure. The below diagram illustrates on-premises systems sending syslog data to a dedicated Azure VM running the Azure Sentinel agent. Alternatively, you can manually deploy the agent on an existing Azure VM, on a VM in another cloud, or on an on-premises machine. The below diagram illustrates on-premises systems sending syslog data to a dedicated on-premises system that's running the Azure Sentinel agent. Next, explain different Sentinel information model components. The Azure Sentinel information model includes the following components. First is normalized schemas that cover standard sets of predictable event types that you can use when building unified capabilities. Each schema defines the fields that represent an event, a normalized column naming convention, and a standard format for the field values. Next one is parsers that help map existing data to the normalized schemas using KQL functions. Deploy the Microsoft-developed normalizing parsers from the Azure Sentinel GitHub parsers folder. Normalized parsers are located in subfolders starting with a SIEM. Last one is content for each normalized schema that includes analytics rules, workbooks, hunting queries, and more. Content for each normalized schema works on any normalized data, without the need to create source-specific content. The following image shows how non-normalized data can be translated into normalized content and used in Azure Sentinel. For example, you can start with a custom, product-specific, non-normalized table, and use a parser and a normalization schema to convert that table to normalized data. Use your normalized data in both Microsoft and custom analytics, rules, workbooks, queries, and more. Moving on, which language is used to query data within Azure Sentinel? Custo Query Language, that is KQL, is a language used for querying data in log analytics, which is where Azure Sentinel holds its data. Next, which Azure service stores the log data that is ingested into Azure Sentinel? Log Analytics is the underlying service that stores the log data for Azure Sentinel. Next, within Azure Sentinel, which Azure product is used to run automated playbooks in response to alerts? Azure Logic Apps is a serverless, no-code solution for automating workflows. It integrates with hundreds of other services, making it a powerful solution for security orchestration, automation, and response. Next, what do you need in order to connect Azure Sentinel to Azure AD? If you want to export sign-in data from Azure AD to Azure Sentinel, you must have an Azure AD P1 or P2 license. Next, what are different Azure Sentinel specific roles? All Azure Sentinel built-in roles grant read access to the data in your Azure Sentinel workspace. Azure Sentinel Reader can view data, incidents, workbooks, and other Azure Sentinel resources. Azure Sentinel Responder can, in addition to the above, manage incidents. Azure Sentinel Contributor can, in addition to the above, create and edit workbooks, analytics rules, and other Azure Sentinel resources. And Azure Sentinel Automation Contributor allows Azure Sentinel to add playbooks to automation rules. It is not meant for user accounts. Next, Azure Sentinel hunting and search and query tools are based on which framework? It's based on MITRE ATT&CK framework. Next, you want to find additional information that explains the analytics template and the rule that is used in detection of the threats. Which section in the analytics rules page provides that information? The detailed view pane contains additional information that explains the template and the rule that is used in detection. Next, which one of the analytics rules can you customize with your own query rules? Scheduled analytic rules provide the highest level of customization. Next, which type of the template rules can create incidents? Based on all alerts generated in Azure Security Center, Microsoft Security Template rules can create incidents based on all alerts generated in Azure Security Center. Next, which one of the template types should you use to create an incident based on all alerts generated in Azure Defender? Template rules based on the Microsoft Security type creates incidents based on all alerts generated in Azure Defender. Next, which one of the following template rules are pre-created in Azure Sentinel Analytics? By default, an alert rule is created by using the Fusion rule template. Next, you want to configure a new KQL code to detect suspicious activity from Azure Activity Logs. In which section can you enter your custom KQL code? In the Set Rule Logic section, you can define the detection method by specifying the KQL code that will run against the Azure Sentinel workspace. Next, can you create your own query to define the detection of the threat? Yes, we can. Next, what is the most efficient way to edit an existing analytic rule? Duplicate the rule and modify to achieve the necessary changes. Next, due to ongoing maintenance activity, you need to stop receiving alerts from analytic rules temporarily. What do you do? By using disable function. Disabled rules retain all the configuration and will temporarily stop creating the alerts from the configured detections while the rule is disabled. Next, which Azure Sentinel component is used to generate alerts? Analytic rules needs to be configured to generate alerts in Sentinel. Moving on, define incident entity. An entity refers to a network or user resource involved with an event. You can use entities as entry points to explore all alerts and correlations associated with that entity. Entity relationships are useful when you're investigating incidents. Instead of analyzing the identity alerts, network alerts, and data access alerts individually, you can use entities to observe any alerts associated with a particular user, host, or address in your environment. Next, can you give a few examples of entity types? Examples include account, host, IP, URL, file hash. Next, to escalate an incident to Tier 2 security team, which incident parameter should you change? You should change the owner parameter. Next, what Azure Sentinel interface enables someone to view timelines and relationships between incident resources? It's the investigation graph. Next, how do bookmarks aid in the threat hunting process? Enable the hunter to save query results for later reference. Next, can we use time parameters in a livestream query? No, we cannot, because livestream queries run continuously. Next, what is Azure Sentinel Playbooks? Azure Sentinel Playbooks contain logic apps action that are collections of procedures that runs in response to an alert. Next, an administrator needs to create a Azure Sentinel Playbook. The administrator creates a logic app and starts Logic Apps Designer. Which connector should the administrator use as a trigger to your playbook? Azure Sentinel playbooks use an Azure Sentinel Logic Apps connector to trigger Logic App actions. Next, what is dynamic content in a Logic App? Dynamic content displays any available outputs from the previous step, which you can use as inputs for the current action. Next, where can you search for a suitable threat detection query or a workbook that you can use for your requirements? Azure Sentinel repository on GitHub contains out-of-the-box detections, exploration queries, hunting queries, workbooks, and playbooks that will help you to secure your environment and hunt for threats. Next, which character can an administrator use to separate the commands in the query? You can use the pipe character to separate commands. Next, which formatting does Azure Sentinel use to format the text in the workbook with text visualization? The text is edited through a markdown formatting, which provides different heading and font styles, hyperlinks, tables. Next, an administrator creates a custom workbook and wants to display the data in table. Which visualization steps should the administrator use in the workbook? You can use grids visualization to present the data in tables. Next, which option allows you to open a previously saved query? The Query Explorer link in the page header helps you access your previously saved queries. Next, as part of UEBA, what are some types of entities are currently identified in Azure Sentinel? The following types of entities are currently identified in Azure Sentinel: user account, host, IP address, malware, file, process, cloud application, domain name, Azure resource, file hash, registry key, registry value, security group, URL, IoT device, mailbox, mail cluster, mail message, and submission mail. Moving on. Where is log data stored in Sentinel, and what's its benefits? After your data has been ingested into Azure Sentinel, it is stored by using log analytics. The benefits of using log analytics includes the ability to use the KQL to query your data. KQL is a rich query language that gives you the power to dive into and gain insights from our data. Next, what are some key prerequisites for Azure Sentinel? Deployment. Azure Sentinel needs access to a log analytics workspace. The process is to create a log analytics workspace and enable Azure Sentinel on top of that workspace. Azure Sentinel is a paid service. Data retention for a customized workspace is based on the workspace pricing tier. If the log analytics workspace is used with Azure Sentinel, the first 90 days of retention are free. To enable Azure Sentinel, you need contributor permissions to the subscription in which the Azure Sentinel workspace resides. To use Azure Sentinel, you need either contributor or reader permissions for the resource group to which the workspace belongs. Next, can you tell me steps to enable Azure Sentinel? Sign into the Azure portal. Select the subscription that Azure Sentinel is to be created in. This account should have contributor permissions to the subscription where the Azure Sentinel workspace will be created, contributor or reader permissions on the resource group that the Azure Sentinel workspace will belong to. Then, search for and select Azure Sentinel, and then select Add. The message No Azure Sentinel Workspace to display opens. Select Create a new workspace. The Log Analytics Workspace dialog box opens. Enter a name for the workspace. Use the drop-down lists to select the subscription to use, resource group, location, and pricing tier. On the Azure Sentinel, choose a workspace blade. Select the workspace that you created. Next, what is Azure Lighthouse? Azure Lighthouse provides capability for cross-tenancy management of Azure services for managed service providers and organizations with multiple Azure tenants, all from a single Azure portal. Azure Lighthouse is integrated with Azure Sentinel, allowing organizations to easily manage Azure Sentinel workspaces from across multiple tenants. Next, which regions don't support Sentinel Workspace? Azure Sentinel runs on workspaces in any general availability region of log analytics, except the China and Germany regions. Next, how do you manage permissions in Azure Sentinel? Azure Role-Based Access Control is the authorization system that manages access to Azure resources. It's built on Azure Resource Manager, which provides fine-grained access management of Azure resources. Use Azure RBAC to create and assign roles in your SecOps team. Azure RBAC lets you grant appropriate access to Azure Sentinel. The different roles give you specific control over what users of Azure Sentinel can access and do. Next, what are different Azure Sentinel specific roles? The following are the 3 dedicated, built-in Azure Sentinel roles. First one is Reader. This role can review data, incidents, workbooks, and other Azure Sentinel resources. Next is the Responder. This role has all the permissions of the Reader role. Plus, it can manage incidents by assigning or dismissing them. And the last one is the Contributor. This role has all the permissions of the Reader and Responder roles. Also, it can create and edit workbooks, analytics rules, and other Azure Sentinel resources. To deploy Azure Sentinel on your tenant, you need contributor permissions for the subscription where the Azure Sentinel workspace is deployed. Next, what are workbooks? Workbooks are used to visualize your data within Azure Sentinel. Think of workbooks as dashboards. Each component in the dashboard is built by using an underlying KQL query of your data. You can use the built-in workbooks within Azure Sentinel, edit them to meet your own needs, or create your own workbooks from scratch. Next, what are some native-to-native connectors available? Azure Sentinel natively interoperates with these Azure and non-Azure services, that are Azure Activity Log, Azure AD, Azure Security Center, Azure AD Identity Protection, Azure ATP, Amazon Web Services CloudTrail, Cloud App Security, Domain Name Servers, Office 365, Microsoft Defender ATP, Azure Web Application Firewall, Windows Defender Firewall, Windows Security Events. Next, what are some external solution connections through API available? Some data sources are connected by using API that the connected data source provides. Most security technologies provide a set of API through which event logs can be retrieved. These API connect to Azure Sentinel, gather specific data types, and store the data in the selected Azure Monitor Log Analytics workspace, including the ones listed on slide. Next, what is Azure Sentinel Analytics? Azure Sentinel Analytics provides several functionalities that you can use to implement security for the data and resources. You can analyze historical data collected from your workstations, servers, networking devices, firewalls, intrusion prevention, sensors, and so on. Azure Sentinel Analytics analyzes data from various sources to identify correlations and anomalies. By using analytics rules, you can trigger alerts based on the attack techniques that are used by known malicious actors. You can set up these rules to help ensure your SOC is alerted to potential security incidents in your environment in a timely fashion. Next, name some common security analytics use cases. Identification of compromised accounts, user behavior analysis to detect potentially suspicious patterns, network traffic analysis to locate trends indicating potential attacks, detection of data exfiltration by attackers, detection of insider threats, investigation of incidents, and threat hunting. Next, can you name the 3 main parts on the analytics homepage? These are, the header bar contains information on the number of the rules that are currently in use. The list of rules and templates contains all the rule templates that Microsoft has preloaded from the Azure Sentinel GitHub repository. The details pane contains additional information that explains each template and rule that you can use in detection. Next, which filters does analytics homepage provides? First is severity, used to filter the rules by levels of severity. Next is the rule type. There are currently 4 types of rules: scheduled, Fusion, Microsoft Security, Machine Learning Behavior Analytics. The third one is tactics, used to filter the rules based on 14 specific techniques and methodologies in MITRE ATT&CK model. And lastly, data sources, used to filter the rules by the data source connector that generates the alert. Next, what are different types of analytics rules? There are currently 4 types of analytics rules, that is, Fusion, Microsoft Security, Machine Learning Behavior Analytics, and Scheduled Alerts. Next, what is Fusion Alerts? Fusion Alerts identify anomalous behaviors and suspicious activities at various stages of the cyber kill chain. Fusion correlates multiple security alerts from various products and uses machine learning to detect advanced multistage attacks. Next, which type of analytics rule provide highest customization? Scheduled alerts analytics rules provide you the highest level of customization. You can define your own expression using Custo query language to filter the security events, and you can set up a schedule for the rule to run. Next, Which other Microsoft security solutions can pass their alerts to Azure Sentinel? You can configure the following security solutions to pass their alerts to Azure Sentinel. Microsoft Cloud App Security, Defender for Server, Defender for IoT, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, Active Directory Identity Protection, and Defender for Endpoint. Next, what are 4 severity levels of alerts in Sentinel? There are 4 severity levels, that is, high, medium, low, and informational. Next, a rule you create from the Microsoft security templates consists of which elements? It consists of the following elements. Name. This is pre-populated from the name of the rule template. Next is description. This provides more details on the creation of the alerts. Next is status. This indicates whether the analytics rule is enabled or disabled. Next is analytic rule logic. This indicates the source of the alert from one of the Microsoft security services. Next is filter by severity, used to tune alerts from a source based on the severity level, which can be high, medium, low, or informational. Next is include specific alerts, used to filter alerts that contain a specific text in their name. Next is exclude specific alerts, used to filter alerts that don't contain a specific text in their name. Next, on which page, you can define the detection method by specifying KQL code that runs against Sentinel Workspace. It's on the set rule logic page. Next, can you explain the 3 pillars of UEBA? Inspired by Gartner's paradigm for UEBA solutions, Azure Sentinel provides an outside-in approach, based on 3 frames of reference. First is use cases. By prioritizing for relevant attack vectors and scenarios, based on security research aligned with the MITRE attack framework of tactics, techniques, and subtechniques that put various entities as victims, perpetrators, or pivot points in the kill chain, Azure Sentinel focuses specifically on the most valuable logs each data source can provide. Second is data sources. While first and foremost supporting Azure data sources, Azure Sentinel thoughtfully selects third-party data sources to provide data that matches our threat scenarios. And lastly, analytics. Using various machine learning algorithms, Azure Sentinel identifies anomalous activities, and presents evidence clearly and concisely in the form of contextual enrichments, some examples of which appear below. Next, do you need additional data for UEBA on Sentinel? No, Sentinel uses the same data set for UEBA as that for SOC operations. No additional ingestion is required. Next, can you explain UEBA anomaly detection process? Actions performed by a user, or a host, or an address, are evaluated contextually, where a true outcome indicates an identified anomaly, across geographical locations, devices, and environments, across time and frequency horizons, compared to users' own history, as compared to peers' behavior, and as compared to organizations' behavior. Next, what are entity pages? When you encounter any entity, currently limited to users and hosts, in a search, an alert, or an investigation, you can select the entity and be taken to an entity page, a datasheet full of useful information about that entity. The types of information you will find on this page include basic facts about the entity, a timeline of notable events related to this entity, and insights about the entity's behavior. Next, what are 3 parts of entity pages? Entity pages consist of 3 parts. First, the left side panel contains the entity's identifying information, collected from data sources like Azure Active Directory, Azure Monitor, Azure Security Center, and Microsoft Defender. Secondly, the center panel shows a graphical and textual timeline of notable events related to the entity, such as alerts, bookmarks, and activities. Activities are aggregations of notable events from log analytics. The queries that detect those activities are developed by Microsoft security research teams. And lastly, the right side panel presents behavioral insights on the entity. These insights help to quickly identify anomalies and security threats. The insights are developed by Microsoft security research teams, and are based on anomaly detection models. Next, what items are included in UEBA timeline? The following types of items are included in the timeline. First is alerts, any alerts in which the entity is defined as a mapped entity. Note that if your organization has created custom alerts using analytics rules, You should make sure that the rules entity mapping is done properly. Second is bookmarks, any bookmarks that include the specific entity shown on the page. And last one is activities, aggregation of notable events relating to the entity. Next, what are entity insights? Entity insights are queries defined by Microsoft security researchers to help your analysts investigate more efficiently and effectively. The insights are presented as part of the entity page and provide valuable security information on hosts and users in the form of tabular data and charts. Having the information here means you don't have to detour to log analytics. The insights include data regarding sign-ins, group additions, anomalous events, and more, and include advanced machine learning algorithms to detect anomalous behavior. Next, the entity insights are based on which data types? The insights are based on the following data types, that is, syslog, security event, audit logs, sign-in logs, office activity, and behavior analytics. Next, what actions you can perform on active analytics rules. It's edit, disable, duplicate, and delete. Moving on, explain incident management in Azure Sentinel. Incident management is the complete process of incident investigation, from creation to in-depth investigation, and finally to resolution. Azure Sentinel provides a complete incident management environment in which you can perform these steps. You can use Sentinel to review detailed incident information, assign an incident owner, set and maintain incident severity, and manage incident status. Next, what is incident evidence? Incident evidence consists of the security event information and related Azure Sentinel assets that identify threats in the Azure Sentinel environment. Evidence displays how a threat has been identified in Azure Sentinel. It links you back to the specific resources that you can use to increase your awareness of incident details. Next, can you explain what events are? Events link you back to one or more events from the log analytics workspaces associated with Azure Sentinel. On their own, these workspaces typically contain thousands of events that are too numerous to manually parse. If a query attached to an Azure Sentinel Analytics rule returns events, these events are attached to the generated incident for potential further review. You can use events to understand the scope and frequency of the incident before investigating further. Next, explain alerts from Sentinel perspective. Most incidents are generated because of an analytics rule alert. Examples of alerts include detection of suspicious files, detection of suspicious user activities, and attempted elevation of privilege. Analytics rules generate alerts based on either KQL queries or direct connection to Microsoft security solutions, such as Azure Security Center or Microsoft Defender 365. If you enable alert grouping, Azure Sentinel includes any related alert evidence for the incident. Next, what are bookmarks? While investigating an incident, you might identify events that you want to track or mark for later investigation. You can preserve the queries run in log analytics by choosing one or more events and designating them as bookmarks. You can also record notes and tags to better inform later threat hunting processes. Bookmarks are available to you and your teammates. Next, what are incident entities from Sentinel perspective? An entity refers to a network or user resource involved with an event. You can use entities as entry points to explore all alerts and correlations associated with that entity. Entity relationships are useful when you're investigating incidents. Instead of analyzing the identity alerts, network alerts, and data access alerts individually, you can use entities to observe any alerts associated with a particular user, host, or address in your environment. Some of the entity types include account, host, IP, URL, and file hash. Next, when you set the status to closed, what options do you get? When you set the status to closed, you will be prompted to choose one of the following from a drop-down list. True positive, suspicious activity, benign positive, suspicious but expected, false positive, incorrect alert logic, false positive, incorrect data, and undetermined. Next, can you explain what is severity? Incident severity is set by the rule or Microsoft security source from which the incident is generated. In most cases, incident severity remains unchanged, but you might manually set the severity if you decide that the incident is more or less severe than initially classified. Severity options include informational, low, medium, and high. Next, how can you run a query automatically? When a query is selected as a favorite, it runs automatically each time you open the hunting page. Next, how can you manage hunting queries? When you select a query from the list, the query details appear on a new pane. The query details pane contains a description, code, and other information about the query. That information includes related entities and identified tactics. You can run a query interactively by selecting Run Query on the Details pane. Next, does Sentinel allows you to hunt for threats using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Azure Sentinel uses the MITRE ATT&CK framework to categorize and order queries by tactics. Attack is a knowledge base of tactics and techniques that are used and observed in the global threat landscape. You can use MITRE ATT&CK to develop and inform your threat hunting models and methods in Azure Sentinel. When you're threat hunting in Azure Sentinel, you can use the attack framework to categorize and run queries by using the MITRE ATT&CK tactics timeline. Next, can you use time parameters in a livestream query? Livestream queries run continuously against your live environment, so you can't use time parameters in a livestream query. Next, what's a livestream? You can use the hunting livestream to test queries against live events as they occur. Livestream provides interactive sessions that can notify you when Azure Sentinel finds matching events for your query. A livestream is always based on a query. Typically, you use the query to narrow down streaming log events, so only the events that are related to your threat hunting efforts appear. You can use a livestream to test new queries against live events, generate notifications for threats, and launch investigations. Next, what's refresh time for livestream? It's 30 seconds. Next, how can you create a livestream? To create a livestream from the hunting page in Azure Sentinel, select the Livestream tab and then select New Livestream from the toolbar. Next, and how can you view a livestream? On the new Livestream page, specify a name for the livestream session and the query that will provide results for the session. Notifications for livestream events will appear in your Azure portal notifications. Moving on, what's Azure Sentinel playbooks? You can create security playbooks in Azure Sentinel to respond to alerts. Security playbooks are collections of procedures based on Azure Logic apps that run in response to an alert. You can run these security playbooks manually, in response to your investigation of an incident, or you can configure an alert to run a playbook automatically. With the ability to respond to incidents automatically, you can automate some of your security operations and make your service organization controls more productive. Next, what's Azure Logic Apps? Azure Logic Apps is a cloud service that automates the operation of your business processes. You use a graphical design tool called the Logic Apps Designer to arrange pre-built components into the sequence you need. You can also use the code view and write your automated process in the JSON file. Next, what's Logic App Connector? Logic Apps use connectors to connect to hundreds of services. A connector is a component that provides an interface to an external service. Next, is Logic App Connector and Sentinel Data Connector same or different? An Azure Sentinel Data Connector and a Logic Apps Connector are not the same thing. An Azure Sentinel Data Connector connects Azure Sentinel with Microsoft security products and security ecosystems for non-Microsoft solutions. A Logic Apps Connector is a component that provides an API connection for an external service and allows integration of events, data, and actions across other apps, services, systems, protocols, and platforms. Next, what are triggers and actions? Azure Logic Apps use triggers and actions, which are defined as follows. A trigger is an event that occurs when a specific set of conditions is satisfied. Triggers activate automatically when conditions are met. For example, a security incident occurs in Azure Sentinel, which is a trigger for an automated action. An action is an operation that performs a task in the Logic Apps workflow. Actions run when a trigger activates, another action completes, or a condition is met. Next, what's Logic Apps Designer? Azure Sentinel creates the Logic App, and then you are directed to the Logic App Designer page. The Logic App Designer provides a design canvas that you use to add a trigger and actions to your workflow. For example, you can configure the trigger to originate from the Azure Sentinel connector when a new security incident is created. The Logic App Designer page provides many predefined templates that you can use. However, to create a playbook, You should start with the blank Logic App template to design the Logic App from scratch. Next, how is Playbook enables automation? The automated activity in the Playbook is initiated by the Azure Sentinel trigger. And what are different triggers available? You can search for the Azure Sentinel trigger in the search box of the design canvas, and then select one of the following two available triggers, that is, when a response to an Azure Sentinel alert is triggered, and when Azure Sentinel incident creation rule was triggered. Next, what actions on the Playbook can you take from the Logic App's header bar? You can run several actions on the Playbook from the Logic App's header bar. First is Run Trigger, used to run the Logic App to test the Playbook. Next is Refresh, used to refresh the status of the Logic App to retrieve the status of the activity. Next is Edit, used to further edit the Playbook in the Logic App's designer page. Next is Delete, used to delete the Logic App if you do not need it. Next is Disable, used to temporarily disable the Logic App to prevent the action from being performed even if the trigger is activated. Next is Update Schema, used to update the schema of the Logic App after a significant change in the logic. Next is Clone, used to make a copy of the existing Logic App, and then use that as a basis for further modification. And lastly, Export, used to export the Logic App to Microsoft Power Automate and Microsoft Power Apps. Moving on, when can you export or pin the query? You can export or pin the query only if the query expression generates data in the query results section. Next, what's Log Analytics Workspace? The Log Analytics Workspace is a repository that stores data and configuration information. You can create queries to filter important information, which you can then use to create analytics rules and detect threats. For example, you can use Azure Sentinel Logs in your tool to search data from multiple sources, aggregate large data sets, and perform complex operations to locate potential security threats and vulnerabilities. Next, what are main parts of Azure Sentinel Logs page? The Logs page has four main parts. The page header contains links to the Queries, Query Explorer, Settings, and Help section. The Tables pane displays collected data from the logs in tables, each comprising multiple columns. The Query pane is where you write your own query expressions. And the Query Result pane displays the results of your queries. Next, from the Queries drop-down menu, you can filter queries based on what criterias? Its category, resource type, solution, and topic. Next, what's Query Explorer? The Query Explorer link on the page header allows you to access your previously saved queries. You can also access some solution queries that basically filter the most common queries that you can use to filter the data. From the solution queries list, you can either run the query or organize the query in the favorites section by selecting the star symbol. Next, what's Table pane? The Tables pane groups logs from different solutions into tables. You can expand the solution group and observe all the logs that are collected. You can also select one of the logs from the Tables pane, and then you can either preview the data or add that log to the Favorites section. Next, what's Custo Query Language? KQL provides you the ability to create, store, and run interactive analytics on collected data. Sentinel uses KQL to visualize and analyze the important data. You can use KQL to create complex analytical queries that include some of the following operators: calculated columns, join functions, and group by aggregates. Next, in KQL, which are the most commonly used operators? Some of most commonly used operators are count, returns the count of rows in the table; take, returns up to the specified number of rows of data; project, selects a subset of columns; sort, sorts the rows of the input table into order by one or more columns; top, returns the first n records sorted by the specified columns; extend, computes derived columns; summarize, aggregates groups of rows; render, renders results as a graphical output. To combine the records from two sources tables, you can use the join operator. The union operator combines two or more tables into one. I hope the video was useful. Please subscribe to stay on top of all the upcoming videos. Please email if you need a copy of this presentation. Thank you and all the best.